Welcome everyone to the final presentation of the Buckerfield Urban Agriculture Series for today. We have many more presentations to come over the weekend. We have a few handouts if you want the schedule. And we have, tomorrow is all about sort of like geared towards families, how do we get people growing more of their own food and preserving it and meal planning. Sunday is going to have a lot more of that sort of like 101. We've got backyard chickens, we've got fermentation. So there is a schedule, lots more to learn. For today, this final talk is with Percy Folkard. He is a sun farmer. Teaches with the university in Kamloops, Thompson River University, and he teaches grazing management. So he's very passionate about soil health, healthy animals, and how today's presentation is all about animals, soils, and carbon is the climate solution. So thank you very much for coming today to share your knowledge. We appreciate it. And here we are.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Percy Folkard. I teach range ecology and I teach pasture management. And my passion is farming sunlight and putting it underground. And I have one of the few jobs of anybody that I know that can take sunlight and make it into leaves and put it underground where it's stored permanently so we can use it later and we can harvest nutrients from the soil, and it's a beautiful system. And we used to do a lot of this, and our whole globe has formed on this, and we've lost it completely, and we need to get back to this. And so I hope to tell a little bit about some of the tricks and techniques, and I'm going to get a little bit sciencey and techie at the same time, just so we have a little bit of background and we understand how to get carbon going back underground. So here in the unceded Secwepemc Ulu, we have cultivation that had happened since time immemorial. And I want to use cultivation in a different term than what we think of in a European, get on your tractor, you pull your plow, you turn the field over. That's a cultivation from a definition, but I want to say that the Secwepemc peoples cultivated this whole landscape using fire and social practices and cultural norms, and they have made what we are living in today. And here's an example of this. This is a grassland out towards Clinton, and this grassland probably would not have been a grassland if it wasn't burned. And yes, the burning could have happened by a natural wildfire, but it also could have simply happened by the people that are cultivating the landscape and lighting fires and keeping it open and regenerating soils, regenerating forests, and doing it within the environment, because we don't live in our environment, we are our environment. And there's a fence line that goes halfway down this photo here, and you can see the plant community looks different on one side than it does the other. And that's because a whole bunch of cows sit on one side of that fence and they don't graze the same way on the other side of the fence. That plant community has formed completely differently. There are plant species on one side that we don't see on the other. There's probably a difference in the amount of carbon in that soil because of the diversity and because of the way it's grazed, and all these things are very evident by a fence line. Barbed wire was invented about 150 years ago, and it was probably one of the worst inventions we ever could have made, because we took all these animals that grazed like bison, millions going across vast swaths of grasslands, and they graze the grass and they feed on it and they poop on it and they move on, and the grass explodes after that and it regenerates. And we put all this barbed wire, we made all these little squares all over the landscape, and we put 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 or 50 cows in there, and we let them eat that into the ground, where after a while we're starting to pull carbon out of the ground. We're seeing our productivity go downhill, our grass species are changing, and we do not have the same climate that we did once before we invented that barbed wire and started stringing it all over the place. So I'm here to talk a little bit about today about how we can use animals to put carbon back in the soil. We do it with our animals, we do it with our plants, and we do it in a beautiful system so that we can build soils and we can put carbon in the real bank. It doesn't need to go up, it needs to go down. We need to pull it out. And I am one of the few farmers, and I wish there was a lot more of us, that are doing this so we can actually say, I harvest the sun. It's a good feeling. So the first way that we do this, the first thing we'll talk about is energy cycling. So here we have sun, it comes from the sky, and we have plants, and they're going to put a bunch of solar panels out with their beautiful green leaves, and they're going to take that carbon dioxide, they're going to pull it out of the atmosphere, they're going to take that carbon and they're going to make a bunch of sugars, and they're going to start pushing it underground as what's called root exudates. Basically like your Slurpee being pushed underground, and what that does is it feeds a whole bunch of fungi and bacteria. And what those fungi and bacteria do is they start releasing enzymes, breaking down mineral soils, breaking down parent materials. That releases a bunch of minerals and all the microminerals that we need. So we need magnesium and calcium and zinc and copper. And all these things are broken down by the fungi that are eating the sugars that are getting from the plants. And then of course the plants need something in exchange for giving all the sugar, so they get all these minerals and nutrients. Fungi do not make their own sugars, they need to get it from the plants. It's a beautiful relationship between plants and fungi, and that is really how soils really start to get activated and really start to pull things underground. So here we have a photo of some roots that I stole from the internet, and you can see there's some nitrogen fixation nodules, and you can see that yes, there's roots there, but a lot of those roots, the root is in the middle here. The root is that red thing that goes down the center, and all those white films are all mycelium. It's all fungi, and they're all feeding off these sugars they're getting from the plants, they're breaking down parent material, and they're swapping with the plants for the sugar, and they're giving you a whole bunch of minerals that the plant needs to grow, and the more minerals the plant has, the stronger it can be, the stronger it can fight off pests, and then of course the stronger the people and the animals that eat those plants are. So like, the next conversation we're going to have is the mineral cycle. So we're going to talk about nutrient cycling a little bit. So here we have animals. They're going to take this carbohydrate that's growing above ground, and they're going to eat it, and they're going to pee it and poop it and put it back on the ground. And when they do that, they can make it into a very available source of fertilizer, pardon me, for the soil. The other part about this is that the more diversity you have in your plant community, the more plants you're going to have, and fungi, and bacteria, and protea, and all these things that are also fixing nitrogen in the soil. So the more activity you have in the soil, the more nitrogen you have. And the more nitrogen you have, the more the plants are going to grow. And the more plants are going to grow, the more sugars they're going to put in the ground, which then feeds all the stuff. And you can see that this feedback loop is starting to really happen, and it's an absolutely beautiful thing. This photo here, I don't know if you can see these little black spots all over the place, but part of the trick is keeping the animals confined and moving them around a lot, so that distribution of manure becomes a beautiful, uniform thing across the environment. Next year, this little spot is going to have a bunch of little dark, lush green spots. Nutrient-dense grass, and they're the first ones that the cows and the deer are going to pick for in the spring, and we know that that's the healthiest grass there. So, with increased energy and sugars that go on the ground, we have more carbon, and then with carbon going in the ground, we get to hold more water. And so basically, for every 1 part of carbon that we put in the ground, we're going to get about 8 parts of water. It's a beautiful thing. We want to store water in the soil. Yes, we can store it in lakes and streams. That's wonderful, but then it just evaporates and goes back into the atmosphere. Why don't we just keep it right where we need to have it in the first place? So healthier soils hold more water. It's, again, also a beautiful thing. So, something I've been just recently dawned on in my quest for knowledge, and I'm going to do a terrible job of explaining this, but this was absolutely fascinating when I discovered this about a week and a half ago. It's a little thing called bioprecipitation. The more plants that we have on Earth, the more little bits of biological material get blown up into the atmosphere. These little, called bioaerosols, then sit in the lower level of the atmosphere. They condense warm water, and what does that do? That comes back to on us as rain. So whenever we think to ourselves why the wetter areas get more rain, part of it is topography, part of it is also the fact that the more biology that we can put up into the atmosphere, the more beautiful rain that we get right away. The flip side of this is if we get dust into the atmosphere, dust blows up in the atmosphere, it's a mineral. It does not condensate water on it the same way that plants and biological material does. So it has to get higher up into the atmosphere, and then it gets colder, so when it comes down, it comes as tornadoes and storms and cyclones. So we need more plants, and we need less dust. So bioprecipitation is something that I've just recently stumbled on. It's a beautiful feedback loop, and it applies more to the prairies than it does here. But the reality is, we don't need dust. Dust is unhealthy soil blowing around. It's going to lead to more storms. And then, of course, the way to stop that is to put more plants in the ground, which keeps the dust in the ground in the first place. And if we have more plant matter going up in the ground, great, it's a beautiful thing. Then we get more consistent rain cycles. So I've already talked about how 8 parts of water are basically held by 1 part of carbon underground. It's a beautiful thing. This is a little bit of good science here because I don't want to have corporate funded science, I want real science. This is a scientist that I worked with. They found that in Alberta, the grasslands that were grazed moderately, in other words, grazed properly, not overgrazed, actually held a little bit more carbon than the soils that were not grazed. So think about this for a sec. We have a huge swath of grassland, millions of bison running all over the place, pooping, moving on, pooping, moving on. It was grazing, but it was a beautiful way to graze. The animals were in one spot, they took one bite, they took one poop, and they moved on. All this spot is beautiful and ready to go again. If you take those same animals and you confine them in that spot you're going to chew all it down, you're going to get a surplus of manure, and you're going to get sick animals, and you're going to start to pull the carbon out of the soil. You're going to make more dust. More dust is going to make more erratic storms. So we need to have this beautiful relationship of animals that are regeneratively moving around on top of healthy plant communities that are growing and regenerating because of this relationship with animals. So ignore the really sciencey graph on the left. I'm just going to basically say that here's another study that shows that what this is called adaptive multi-paddock grazing. So in other words, if this was a field and you were grazing it, you're better off to put 100 cows in here for half a day than you are to allow 1 cow to graze in here for a week. And the reason is because all the grass gets just grazed at the same time, all the manure and everything, it's all distributed evenly. It's a beautiful thing, and it moves on. That's what's referred to as adaptive multi-paddock grazing, if you ever see it in the scientific literature. If you put that 1 cow in there, you're not going to get the grasses grazed properly. Some are going to start to seed head, some are going to oxidize by the weather. You're not going to get that regenerative effect. It's a beautiful thing, having these animals confined and moved on. Not confined and staying confined like a big CAFO. So anyways, here's some science that shows that yes, you're able to put more soil carbon underground and increase then the above ground biomass that grows above that by doing proper grazing. So we need more soil carbon and we need more water. And to do this, we need more plants. And to do that, we need more animals. Now, it seems like that's a little counterintuitive when we say we need more animals, but we actually do need more animals, and we need them in the right spot at the right time, managed well. That's what we need. That would be my Christmas present. That would be a beautiful thing. Then we start to get soils that are growing. So, you can't really see that, but there's 2 little birds sitting on that cow. And this was a real beautiful moment at me on my farm when I started to see birds coming and perching on the backs of my animals. There's my fly control, there's biodiversity, they're also in the grass. I started to see changes when I started to do this. I started to see soils come back. I started seeing plants I'd never seen before. I started seeing birds come in, making homes on the back of my cattle that don't have any flies on them. I didn't pour on any insecticides that are going to destroy the worms in my field as well. It's a beautiful thing, and showing me that my system is a bigger part of the bigger system. I stole this from the interweb, and it's not right. Ignore it. Some cows actually really are a problem. Actually, probably 85% of cows, unfortunately, are a problem. We graze them here. We have beautiful cows that are sitting here in pastures and grasses, and then we ship them across the border to be fattened in feedlots to be brought back here. And unfortunately, that's where the environmental footprint for a cow becomes very heavy. And we need to break this apart. We can raise cows here. They never have to ship anywhere. We're harvesting all these nutrients for ourselves. We're not relying on the corn futures and the barley futures and fertilizer prices and tractor equipment to be fixed. And so anyways, Yes, cows are a little bit part of the problem. Most of them are. Let's go and learn how to do it the right way. Here we have the problem. We have dust blowing from too much tillage in the top left, top right, pardon me, going up in the atmosphere. And then we have all these animals standing in one spot. So the bottom left there is a feedlot of, I don't know, 50,000 cattle. We're losing all those nutrients. They're not going anywhere. They're going to be trampled in. They're going to end up dust up in the clouds. These things need to be back on field somewhere. We don't need to go through the Haber-Bosch process, release copious amounts of methane to make a whole bunch of nitrogen that gets put into a tractor and spread on a field that has a huge, incredible carbon footprint that no one's talking about. No one's talking about methane from the Haber-Bosch process of nitrogen fertilizers. Everyone's only talking about cow farts. And methane does not even come from cow farts. Methane actually comes from cow burps when they're eating their grass. And the healthier a diet a cow is, the less methane it releases anyways. So we have to be really conscious about when we hear buzzwords about our climate and things, because sometimes we're not always fed the right thing because there's a lot of money in the fertilizer companies, and there's a lot of money in this, and there's a lot of money in that. So what do we need? We need graziers. We need good ones. We need to be putting our herds together. We need to be smarter. We need to be feeding our animals on our soils and moving them along. It's healthier for the animals. It's healthier for the soil. The animals don't have to be shipped as far. We need more knowledge here, and the more people that can bring ourselves together and start doing this, and I'm talking with my neighbors, why are you managing your herd and I'm managing my herd, and you're grazing your field and I'm overgrazing my field? Well, we can put our herds together, and then we have twice as much area, and we're probably going to grow twice as much grass. It's about 2.53 times more grass that you can grow if you graze your fields properly than if you just dump your cows in a field and come back at the end of the year. So we have a lot of knowledge to learn how to do this, and we need to learn together. So let's talk about how we do this. This is where the science, this is where the rubber meets the road. This plant over on the left here, it was grown from the start to the finish of the year. So it starts growing, it puts up some new tillers, it puts up leaves, and then what it does is when it starts to get into the reproductive mode, it starts pulling nutrients out of the leaves to go to make seeds so the plant can reproduce and spread a seed and grow again as a new plant next year. The plant in the middle there says clipped once at 50%. So when the plant got up before it started to go into reproductive mode, it was cut, and all of a sudden the plant lost its apical tillers that was going to make seed, and instead the plant says, okay, well I can still grow, so I'm going to put more leaves out. So all of a sudden, the volume of leaves, which is what animals are grazing, by the way, sheep, goats, cattle, we have actually more vegetation on that middle plant, and it was grazed once. It's a beautiful thing. So here's what we do though, if we put all the animals in the field and we let them take more than one bite of a plant. We have that plant over on the right-hand side. If it grazed too much, it's lost too much of its photosynthetic ability, it's not able to put up new leaves, and it's basically put up a few little tillers, and that's about it. So if we want to maximize the amount of plants, that maximizes the amount of root exudates that are put underground. So that beautiful plant there in the middle, which got grazed once and then the cows were moved on, that plant is photosynthesizing the most. It has the most solar panels that are all out there. And the other beautiful thing about this is that that is making the most amount of root exudates, which are then going underground. So we're feeding more fungi, we're feeding more bacteria, we're regenerating more soil, and we've grazed this once, and we've moved on. It is a beautiful thing. It's a science experiment. It was clipped probably by scissors, but it's the same. Actually, if you had an animal grazing it, the saliva from the animals actually activates the plant to grow faster. Plants like saliva. Yes, yes. And if you see a field and it's been hayed once and then it comes back all lush and green, it's kind of the same thing, but it's missing a really important point. What we're trying to do here is maximize leaf area above ground, which maximizes photosynthesis, which maximizes root exudates going underground. I'm not managing animals, I'm trying to manage soil. So this does not just apply to cows, this can apply to sheep. Sheep are beautiful because they have more of a diverse diet. They like to eat weeds and things that sometimes cows don't like to do. Same with goats, it takes more infrastructure. And then of course, here we have pigs in an ecosystem too. And I bring up pigs because pigs are really fascinating rooters. And I'm standing up here and I have not mentioned tillage once, but if we want to take carbon out of soil, we till. As soon as you till, you're going to break down all of the soil aggregates that were formed by all the mycelium and all those bacteria and all those root exudates, and you get aggregates that start to form. You get clumps, you get soil clumps. When you get soil clumps, you know you're starting to get habitat for all these little microinvertebrates and things that are living in the soil. They've got a home now. So, it's interesting. If you are driving along a road and you're driving along on one side of the road, the field has already melted off in the spring, and the other side still has snow on the ground, sometimes farmers think to themselves, aha, I plowed in the fall, so I have more bare dirt, so when the sun shines on my soil, it's going to heat it up faster, so it's going to grow faster in the spring. And it blows me away how wrong that is when you think of how soil and all the invertebrates and microorganisms in soil make heat. They metabolize, and they're making all these little homes, and they have all these little bodies. And sometimes, when you're driving along and you see a heavily tilled soil, and it's still sitting there with snow on it, meantime, this field next to it, which has not been tilled and it has a little bit of grass on it, it's already melted off. And it's not melted off from its sun, it's melted because of the heat of the soil. The soil has already started to activate, and it's melting soil from the bottom up. It's a beautiful thing. We don't understand tillage as well as we do. So here we have pigs. Pigs do a great job of tilling. They don't burn any fossil fuels. They poo and pee all over the soil, and if you can keep them confined, they do a wonderful job, and then you can plant your garden next year. Finally, we've been training and breeding animals to be incredibly inefficient. So when we feed cattle in feedlots, we try to stuff them with grain, and we genetically select for the ones that do well, that fatten the most. But we're not doing a very good job of counting how many calories or how many tons of carbon dioxide we're releasing in the atmosphere to grow these cows. Cows should actually be grown more like deer, and sheep and goats are the same way. Think of how little a deer has to eat to make meat. The genetic efficiency of those animals blows anything that we can do out of the water. So we need to take domestic animals and graze them more like wild animals. We also need to be breeding our domestic animals so that they are epigenetically efficient. In other words, don't feed your cows and select the fat ones. Starve your cows and select the fat ones, because then you are selecting the ones that are going to be epigenetically efficient to grow on poor quality feed. You're going to reduce your input costs. If my cows live off of air, my bottom line does a lot better. So the road ahead is rosy, because I'm saying it is, and we are going to be happy, and we're going to move forward in a positive way. The field on the right was grazed at, I would say, a rate of, say, 200 cows per acre. The field on the left-hand side, which looks yellowed, or partly gold, that would probably have been grazed at maybe a half a cow per acre. And the reason is because on the right-hand side, all the cows stood in one spot, they took all the vegetation, they put and peed all over the place, and it exploded back, and it's green and lush, and the water holding capacity in that soil is a beautiful thing. On the left-hand side, the cows, because there's not enough of them there, too much of the grass got ahead of itself. So a lot of this grass is growing up, it's starting to form little seed heads. That's not what the cows are eating anymore. Instead, the cows are nipping at the new little shoots that are coming off the bottom. So we've already created a situation where the majority of the field is now no longer contributing carbon underground, whereas that field on the right-hand side is. It's got all these green leaves, it's still photosynthesizing, and you got root exudates going underground, feeding all that beautiful stuff. We don't have that on the left-hand side. It's a neighbor I haven't convinced yet. We're working on it. Anyways, There's a lot of technical details behind what I'm talking about here and how we move animals around. There's technologies, and we can have another discussion another day for that, but I had to get enough of the basics in to cover the science of why we need to have animals in the right spot at the right time, and they will be happier and healthier before it. I don't give any shots to my animals because I don't need to, because they're never standing in the same spot. The grass is always greener on my side, I guess. Anyways, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you, engaged audience. Any questions?
So can we make eating pastured meat affordable?
Can we?
Can we make it affordable for everyone?
The question is, can we make eating pastured meat affordable? That's a loaded question.
How does it work?
How does it work?
How will it work?
Well, okay, so first of all, if you're here, AAA grade Angus steak, that animal was finished in a feedlot. And I cannot poo-poo the feedlot model because that supports a lot of ranchers. You can't be shooting, you got to be friends with our animals, right? So let's think a little bit about how all the things that we need to do. We need to have breeds of cattle that finish better on lower quality grass. We need to have probably smaller frame size because we might need to grow them out to be 2 years. We can't harvest them at 18 months because we didn't fill them full of grain and have this really short time expectation for when we can finish these. We need to have a connection between the people that are eating the food, with the processor, with the farmer, and that connection is so broken right now because we have a system that doesn't support that. So we need to have the ability to people learn how to graze these things properly, work together so that we're not all grazing. We can, why do we all need to manage 5 cows when one person can manage 100 cows easily? And then we need to learn how to process these things. We need to learn how to connect with our farmers. We need these institutions, and it's so easy to go to the grocery store and get a steak and take it home. And, well, that was easy. Yeah. It's not easy. Did I answer your question?
It's going to take time.
It's going to take time, and we all need to work together. And whether, like in a lot of areas in the States, they have grazing clubs. Bring it. And wait for a grazing club. There's no grazing club. How are we going to talk to other people that want to learn how to do things? Or sure, I'll take your cows off of you. Can you take my sheep? And my buddy here, he'll run all the pigs. And the more we keep these things together, and right, we don't need to do 15 different things at once. If I do one thing really well, let me just focus on that one thing. You focus on the one thing you do well. So I'm all for mixed farms. I love mixed farms. We need more mixed farms. And we need animals eating each other's, and we need to have chickens living with pigs because there's so much fresh manure that the pigs are leaving for the chickens to eat all their scraps. And I just came across a scientific paper about 6 months ago that said you can supplement up to 40% of a hog's diet with manure from cows or horses if it's less than 2 hours old, because there's so many great amino acids coming out of the back end that's way better for them to grow than if they're eating Roundup soaked grain. There's just so many things that we need to learn and get back to, and a lot of it's smaller scale, but being smart with scale, and it's incorporating crops together, especially animals with crops, animals with animals. And we have all sorts of fields around here that are not being grazed, that could be grazed. We are growing a ton of grass that just gets going in the sun, and then it makes a seed head, and it drops its seed on the same spot that's not doing anything. We could be making better use of that. So, how do we get there?
How do we do that? How do we get more people to graze their land instead of just growing?
Now we do need hay, unfortunately, because we live in a northern climate and we can't graze year round. If I can graze for 7 months of the year, I am happy. I don't want to, I was grazing for 8 months of the year when I was in Kamloops because I had enough land, right? So we do need some people to make hay. There's a lot of grazing technology that no one either believes in or buys into yet. My herd stands behind a single hot wire that I can put up in about 10 minutes. the side of the road. And all my neighbors are like, I want to move my herd so when your bull escapes, so it doesn't breed on my heifers. And I'm like, okay. And then 2 months goes by and the bull's in the same spot. Well, no, it's being moved around, but it hasn't escaped. So there's technology that we can start to use. And then there's a whole, so we have all this whole fire thing, right? Which of those two fields is going to burn first if ashes start blowing off the hillside because it's on fire, right? So if we can keep vegetation in a green vegetative state as opposed to that gold, hardy, dry state, we're going to reduce our fire load. We've fed a bunch of animals for free. Someone could get some rent so that they can pay farm taxes instead of we just have to get more coordinated. We have to get slicker as a grazing community. We have to see more animals leave. It's hard now, we have chicken flu or whatever, but birds outside is what we need. We need them pooping on grass, and then that grass doesn't stop growing for 2 years.
What role does council play?
What roles can cows play? Can council play? It's a tough question. Council is going to say, well, we need to hire an agricultural expert to do a SWOT analysis and come up with a solution to our problem.
For $1 million.
Yeah. So I'll just wait till the contract comes in and you can pay me. Just kidding. No, we need to have council, I guess, maybe. Okay, so there's lots of money that governments throw to subsidize agriculture that's done the wrong way. Why don't we throw money at agriculture that's done the right way? So we don't need to, for example, measure carbon in our soils because it's so hard to do. It's really difficult. You got to send that to a lab. The lab is going to give back some results. Some soil scientists might argue over that data for a long time, when really all we need to do is take a pipe, take a little bit of water and put it on the ground, pour that water into the pipe, and see how much of that water goes into the ground. So Gabe Brown is a farmer in North Dakota, and if you read any of the regenerative stuff about Gabe Brown, he made the water holding capacity in his fields go from 2 inches an hour to 11 inches an hour by grazing, cover crops, no-till, crimping plants, pushing them down, seeding through that, being really smart with what he puts on and in his soils, and like I said, going from 2 to 11, if I'm on the prairies and I'm seeing floods, I'm probably not realizing that I've taken all the water holding capacity out of my soil by tilling for so long. And then, of course, we get onto this whole fertilizer conversation about, okay, so if we put a synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, the plants then don't need to put as much root exudates in the soil because they're just going to get all this stuff that's coming out of the soil for free. But then we have 40% of it being taken by the plants and then 60% being washed in and creating an algae bloom in our lake or something like that, right? So we need to be so much smarter with the carbon that we do have in our soil, be nicer to it, put more in there.
Education.
It's all right. We have a lot of education to do, and it's difficult because in Canada, most of our universities agriculturally are all funded by the big ag companies that sell the seeds and the fertilizer. So it's a difficult spot we're in. TRU is a beautiful program because it's very much a regenerative. We want to use what we can get on our land. We want to not have to input things because that costs money. We want to build our own soils because then and all these regenerative cropping farmers, they tend to make more money after they convert anyways because they see their input costs up. If I'm going to grow 4,000 acres of something and I'm going to make $1 million from selling my crop, but $990,000 have gone to buy my equipment and my fertilizer and my seed. Farmers aren't even a consumer at that point. They're a producer, they're a consumer. They're just buying stuff and using the soil as this medium, and they're producing food that has such low nutrient values that, the plants are getting eaten by bugs. They can't fight off There's a thing called Brix. Do you know what Brix is? So Brix is a soluble sugar and mineral content in a leaf, and you can buy a refractometer, you squish some plant juice onto a Brix meter, and you're going to get a reading of anywhere between 0 and 30. If you put fertilizers on a plant, you're going to bring the bricks meeting right down, because all of a sudden the soluble sugar and mineral content is going to drop because the plants can get this stuff artificially. If you have a bricks reading of about 10 or 12, that's a bare minimum. That's where you want to be. You want to have a good amount of soluble sugars and nutrients and minerals in your leaves that then the plants are growing for themselves, they're able to fight off. If you get bricks readings up into 15, 20, 25, you will never have a pest problem. You won't even have powdery mildew because they're just growing. But we don't understand that when we start to apply chemicals and fertilizers, it breaks down all those soil processes, and then your soluble sugars in your leaves are going to drop because they're just not getting the same exchange, because you've kind of like, oh, we don't need what's in the soil, we're just going to put this. And you can put it there for a year and you might get a good crop, but the following year is not. So we need to do more bricks readings.
Does anybody else have questions? Excuse me? Well, thank you so much for coming.
Yes.
Really appreciate it. We'll have to get Percy to do some more one-on-one education this winter,
Done.
so we can go strong in the spring.